It did start recording.
Yeah, that's all right. All right,
Okay.
everybody. So we'll do just a real quick recap of our intro. Thank you so much, Jennifer and AARP, for having me. My name is Melissa Smith. I am a licensed clinical mental health counselor based out of New Mexico, but a longtime Texan. And Texas AARP is the one sponsoring us today. And so very grateful for that. I have worked in the caregiver field for a very long time. I ran a nonprofit for over a decade for caregivers of Alzheimer's and other dementia to work with them on wellness and well being. I've led mindfulness for about 20 years, and I absolutely love this practice. So, my hope today is that you have carved out some time for yourself, maybe even have a pen and a piece of paper handy to kind of jot just a couple of notes that you might find relevant or important so that you can have some recall later. You've invested this hour to be here, and so my hope is that you will take that extra step just to add a little bit to your memory bank by making just a few notes and also clearing your calendar. Jennifer just put in a link to register for next time. So you'll want to save that as it's not live yet. If you wish to receive this recording, you can private message me in the chat box, your email address, and I am happy to send it to you. So, those of you that were here last week, we talked about boundaries. And in fact, I'm going to go ahead toward the end of our session today. I'll do that. I will send you, I'll put in the link, our discussion on boundaries. And there were lots of questions. And some wanted me to do just a short recap to begin. And I think it's actually quite relevant to our topic today, which is grief and resiliency. When we think about boundaries, and boundaries are simply that space between you and the space between me and you, in which I am okay and you are okay. That's a very simplistic way to look at it. It's about embodied safety. We tend to be constantly working on self-protection, right? How do we, right? How do we exist in our world, in our environment, and continuously, right, protect ourselves from things that scare us, things that excite us, things that make us feel anxious, things that make us feel worried. We often do that self-protection in terms of grief as well. So just a very short statement about boundaries in and of themselves. If it's nothing you have ever attempted or tried before, I'm going to encourage you maybe to do just a little bit of homework on the topic. One of the biggest things that you could do as a caregiver is learn what is healthy for you to say no to and what is healthy for you to say yes to. When we weave in grief in terms of boundaries, it has a lot to do with it because often we don't allow ourselves moments or times to grieve, and often our culture does not allow us opportunities to grieve and how we would like to grieve. Often we offer a sense of grief or grieving to other people the way in which we want to grieve. I don't know, coming from Texas, we tend to feed grief. Anybody else? Let me bring you some food. Let me bring you a meal. And while that is lovely, I think it is important to also consider who you're bringing it to. What would they like? Can they even answer that question? Or who are the people closest to them? And are they able to answer that question? And so that helps us really establish a sense of, right, healthy boundaries during grieving. So we're going to incorporate some mindfulness as we talk about grieving today. And what mindfulness does is it gives us that little extra of these small, generous practices that we should do over and over, many times a day, throughout the day. And they're small enough that they can help reset our nervous system. So when I think about mindfulness, it's so similar, the definition really to boundaries. Mindfulness is that moment in which you recognize something and then you create a pause. And in that pause, it gives you the opportunity to either react, right? That's without mindfulness, or respond. When we can find a pause, we have more capacity to respond. Now, do we always respond in the right way? That is right. That is how we cultivate these practices. When we give ourselves some space between, then we have way more options. And those options give us what we call agency or self-reliance. Um, I would also say one of my favorite phrases is I want to have the highest allegiance to myself and what I am putting out into the world over culture, over previous expectations, maybe developmental things, how I was raised. I want to be able to have that agency so that I can be clear and kind and direct. And those things, those aspects in mindfulness can help us implement that clear, kind, direct communication. So, I'm just going to say a quick hi to those of you who said hello in the chat box. I'm so glad that you joined us. And a few of you wrote why you joined us. Some of you are deep in grief and it's hard. I hear you. Some of you are caregivers. One just recently lost your dad. Um, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and I'll put my email address in here. Caregivers with an S, retreatinfo@gmail.com. So you're welcome to just send me a quick email and say, I want the recording from today. You can also leave me your email address in a private chat. So I'll go ahead and share my screen today to give us just a little bit of an introduction to grief. And I know if you are human, you have experience. You have experience with grief. Um, when we first, I'm going to go ahead and see if I can share this and then not worry about talking at the same time. All right. So please, at any time, um, if you are unable to see me or to see the slides, feel free to type in the chat box as I will be monitoring that. So let's do just a short mindfulness exercise. And this is called the 5 senses of grounding. And so let's just imagine many of you mentioned that you are experiencing some grief. Other of you are probably experiencing some other kind of stress or stressor, if not today, this week, or this month, or this year. We do grounding exercises in mindfulness to help us bring us back to what we call the present moment. And the present moment enables us to stay in our nervous system in the here and now, as opposed to projecting, future tripping, or moving back into the past, which is that, right? That rumination, coulda, woulda, shouldas, all the regrets. While regrets can be useful so we know how to move forward, um, rumination, I find overall, is not useful unless we ruminate equal amounts in the positive, right? If we have rumination in order to plan, in order to improve, in order to self-evaluate or have some self-analysis that isn't so overly exaggerated, that can be quite useful. But we want to work on practices that allow us to stay grounded in the moment. My guess is that many of you probably have these kinds of grounding practices and don't even realize that you're doing them. Maybe in the morning you have a sip of coffee and you really savor the taste. Maybe many of you walk outside and enjoy the sunshine first thing in the morning. Take a big breath and exhale. That can be a grounding exercise. Many of you have animals or pets, and you might find that petting your dog or your cat or holding an animal is quite soothing. Those would all be very healthy grounding exercises. So I want to encourage you as you get your pen and paper today to be noting grounding exercises in which you already do. So let's think about the 5 senses. When we think about each of these senses, we're just going to note a single one of them. So first, take your eyes just a little bit off the screen and note anything that you see that is either green or living. I'm looking at leaves right here. Now, I'm not judging it. I'm not saying, oh, I need to water that, or oh, that's beautiful. I'm just noting it. Green leaves. And then exhale and drop your shoulders. Next, anything that you might hear. And I have the real benefit of being able to hear birds outside my window. You might hear my voice. Maybe you hear the air conditioning. Without judgment, without saying, oh, it's cold or warm, or I hear the traffic and I don't like that. Just noting what you hear. And then exhaling, drop the shoulders, relax your jaw. Is there anything that you might smell? Is there a particular scent? If you don't smell a scent, many of us have allergies or different things, or maybe some of these senses are not accessible to you. Please substitute any other sense that makes sense for you. So for me, I smell some of my plants. I can smell my geraniums. They have kind of a fragrant smell. And then let's note, is there any taste in the mouth? You might swallow, take a sip of water. I want to encourage you to stay hydrated and just notice. Just notice the taste without judgment. And next, touch. So you might put your hands on your clothing. Is it smooth or rough? You might touch your hands. Is it warm or cool? Again, without judgment, you're just noticing. What is the touch like? What is quality of touch? So let's bring our attention back to the camera or back to the screen, if you will. Take a breath in if you are able to through your nose. Breathe on long, full, and deep. And a long, slow exhale. And do that one more time. Breathe in. This time as you exhale, imagine or feel your feet moving down into the earth. As I even say the word feet, I can feel them get heavy or tingly. I'm just noticing. And now, if you're able, I would love for you to type into the chat box what that exercise was like for you. Was it easy or hard to not judge? Was it easier than you thought? Did it actually bring you into the present moment? So I'd love to hear a little bit of what your experience was. And as you're doing that, we're just going to dive right into grief and grieving. So it comes from the root of the Latin word gravus, which means weighty, right? I like Elizabeth Gilbert's quote, grief is a force of energy that cannot be controlled or predicted. Grief does not obey your plans, your wishes, and grief will do whatever it wants to you, whenever it wants. And in that regard, grief has a lot in common with love. Many of you might have heard the quote, because we have loved so much, you can also substitute care so much that we also grieve so much. Why is there so much of an ache when we lose something or someone or our own health or a job or we mourn leaving? It's often because we've created an attachment there. And it doesn't necessarily have to be love. It could just be that form of attachment. As I don't want to make an assumption that everyone or everything that you have grieved, that there has been a sense of love. Grief can be quite complex and complicated. I'm going to just note, someone said the exercise that we did just a moment ago was calming. It puts you in the moment. Ooh, but you wanted to judge. Yeah, good to notice, right? So don't judge yourself for judging. It's just important to notice. It's easy to do as quite often I'm outside, but today I'm indoors because of the rain. And it brings me into the present moment. Good. And I love this quote from Nick Cave. It seems to me that if we love, we grieve. That's the deal. That's the pact. Grief and love are forever intertwined, and grief is a terrible reminder of the depths of our love. Like love, grief is non-negotiable. And again, I'll encourage you to substitute love with care deeply, um, attached to, um, feel something deeply for. We can have all different types of grief, a collective grief, an ambiguous grief. There are just so many different types. So grief is those conflicting feelings caused by the end or a change in a familiar pattern of behavior. And we think about um, that that pattern of behavior that we create around something. I think about often moving. As an adult, I have moved every 3 or 4 years of my adult life. Living where I live now, I have lived the longest I have since growing up in Texas. And there is a sense of that, right? Wanting to protect myself from vulnerability, of getting to know others if I'm going to move, right? There is sort of that, um, the idea if I care so much, then I'm going to have the feeling of loss. I don't know how many of you can relate to that. But oftentimes, that self protection or too rigid of boundaries can happen when we fear vulnerability. And when we let that vulnerability and become more open, that's when we become more open to loss. And loss and love, grief and suffering, right? There are these sides to ourselves in which enrich our lives and gives us the full sense of humanity. It's what might spur us on to become an activist or to create change in our community because we might lose something. It is what might spur us on to work to rescue something, right? If we see an animal or another person, right? We deeply care for something and we fear a sense of loss. So it does become oftentimes a catalyst for change. It can also be a catalyst for all different types of emotions. So when we think about what um, what these specific types of grieving are, when we think about what bereavement is that moment in which we find out about that loss. We have that initial, right, that initial sense of grieving or grief or loss. Grief can be that what comes about out of that loss or bereavement, which could be any kind of emotion. And as we'll talk about later, it is not linear. It can be in a circle, in a spiral. It can be like a pinball machine. It can be all different ways. Mourning is more of a sense of collective grief. It is what we typically do when we have a memorial or some kind of ritual. There is a period of mourning in which we engage in either ritualistic exercises or things that have to do with our spiritual beliefs or our culture or our community, but it is typically associated with a sense of connection or community. I'm just going to briefly cover some of these different types of grief. And uh, and there are many, many overlaps in these different types of grief. Disenfranchised grief might be a type of grief in which, and it's often together with cumulative grief, so it can be complex as well. But disenfranchised is often associated with the kind of grief in which we just don't talk about. It could be a miscarriage, it could be a suicide, it could be a divorce, it could be not a divorce, just being with someone or having a deep friendship and not having a way to explain it to someone else, the depth of loss in which you feel. It's often, not always, but associated with a sense of um, others not understanding, sort of a me and othering experience. So there is a perception, perhaps, that I might not think others would understand how I feel, and there would be some fear or vulnerability in sharing that. It could be in deportation. It could be um, uh, incarceration. It could be all different kinds of grief, and it could have, right, that element of either shame or guilt, unexpressed fears, um, just something that feels like unspoken. Anticipatory grief can have to do with illness. You could be anticipating if there is a cancer diagnosis, or let's say an unclear diagnosis. An anticipatory is similar to ambiguous grief. One of the clearest examples of ambiguous grief would be Alzheimer's or dementia, because there are these tiny little losses in their personality and no growth, and it's quite ambiguous. It could be on the other end of the spectrum of someone who has a mental illness and you don't know where that mental illness is taking you. And I use illness very loosely, because I am not a fan of pathologizing, but I'm using it to just simply describe something that might be familiar for both of us. So anticipatory grief can be something in the future in which we just don't know, right? Or it could have a finite, could have a finite end to it. A collective grief. A popular example might be, I remember when Robin Williams died, and there were several of my friend group that we just had just a strange sense of grieving together, just this sense of loss. Um, and there was also ambiguousness to it on surrounding his own death. There could be cumulative grief. In other words, it could be a lot of different types of grief that add up and pile on top of each other. Also, traumatic grief. Traumatic grief could be a sudden or unexpected death. Again, which, right, it often overlaps with disenfranchised grief, because we don't often talk about traumatic griefs. Someone unexpectedly was could be killed in an automobile accident or things like that, and um, there are different responses in the body in regards to traumatic grief. Now, someone might experience within the same family the same person or thing that they lost, and one might have a traumatic response, and the other one might have just a grief arc in and of itself, because we are all unique individuals and have our own, right, developmental responses to things, of how we coped with things growing up. And also, I think of traumatic grief, if we can think of that as um, also how we are informed about it. And this is a really important part about grief, having a sense of sensitivity or awareness around it, which typically means employing one of the basic fundamentals of mindfulness, which is curiosity. So not assuming that something would be traumatic for someone, or not assuming that someone is okay, or that we need them to be okay because we're uncomfortable with their discomfort. So, having that gentle awareness, we can employ something which is the antidote to so many things in our life, which is a sense of curiosity, creating a pause, asking a question, creating a pause, asking a question. Inhibited grief. You might see this in someone who kind of fakes it, who says, like, yeah, I'm fine. I'm okay. It's all right. It's okay. It's all good. No, no, I got it. I can do everything. I can clean the whole house myself before the memorial. I mean, right? It might be someone's way of processing grief, but if they continue to show no sign of vulnerability, it could be they're inhibiting grief. Now, it is not our responsibility when we employ mindfulness, again, to be judgmental or to make assumptions based on that, or assuming they might have inhibited grief. Instead, if we can employ curiosity, how is that experience for you? How are you holding up? If I were to ask you, um, would it be better if I deliver groceries or deliver a meal? What would be better for you? Can I just sit with you? I don't know what to do. So there are different ways in which we can respond to grief without making assumptions that it is about them. And grief can be completely absent, meaning someone can not only inhibit, but completely numb, um, or shut down altogether, and have no response. And that would also be something to note and get curious about. I love this diagram when we think about growing around grief. There's lots of different analogies. When you look at the circles and you say, okay, this is what we think grief is. It looks like this circle. And as our world, right, um, continues to expand, or we continue to grow, or we continue to care for self, right? We continue to have self-realization. We continue to have interactions with our world and our environment, and continue to move through our sense of sorrow and mourning, then grief tends to stay about the same, but we enlarge around it. And I love that visual because I think oftentimes, and there are different philosophies of grief out there, and this just happens to be the one that I ascribe to, which is that I don't have to resolve my grief in order to be a whole person. I don't have to say goodbye to that person or that thing in order to complete the grief. My relationship to what I have lost will change, but it doesn't mean that I have to bury my emotions or bury my feelings in regards to that grief. So when we think about uh, grief, the other side of the coin of grief, we talked about love or caring deeply. I would say that it's also resiliency. And resiliency, right, is that capacity to withstand or recover quickly from difficulties. It's a sense of innate toughness, right? It's our ability when we get squashed to bounce back to shape. We have sort of a slinky effect, right? We can expand and contract. We can be more malleable. And how do we have resiliency? Well, we actually have to let grief in. We actually have to allow a sense of vulnerability so that we can become more resilient. It is because we suffer that we know what joy is like. It is because we know what joy is like that we can recognize when things are hard. And right, most of us are going to have day-to-day activities that are kind of about like this, right? If we looked at sort of a wave. But we want to think about when we hit the top, we don't always want to stay there, right? Some of us might want to stay in that sense of, right, joy at all times. But there is some beauty in bittersweetness. There is beauty in grieving together as a community. There's beauty in being able to hold or companion others in grief. And so if we can think about finding not one or the other or extremes, but finding our way of continuously balancing over a period of time rather than having some mystical balanced life, which doesn't exist. I'm so sorry to report. Then we can experience these joys and these lows without being, right, completely derailed. And now, mind you, there are times in which we need to lie down. We might feel derailed, and that's okay. It's how do I know when it's prolonged? How do I know when I'm experiencing prolonged grief? Well, a good idea would be to check in with a therapist. Would also be to check in with yourself. Am I growing? Am I also experiencing not just the lows, but some highs in the midst of it? Do I have capacity for emotions? And some of you might need someone to companion you in that journey so that it doesn't feel quite so scary, so that you don't feel quite so alone. And asking for help, I know as a caregiver, is not easy. So, how do we create resiliency? Well, we want to recognize essentially what is stress in our body. So, let's take a moment, and if you will, take your eyes just a little bit off the screen And let your eyes either close or fall on something just soft. It could be the softness of a picture, it could be the softness of the floor, it could be out the window, whatever makes sense for you. And let's take just a nice, long, slow inhale and a nice, long, slow exhale. Oh, I just felt my jaw drop. And next time you inhale, just notice if it feels like you're holding or carrying or tensing or tightening any part of the body. And on your exhale, much like a metaphor, imagine releasing, removing, putting down, throwing off, stomping out anything that you might be experiencing in the body that feels like contained tension or stress. Let's do that one more time. Breathe in. And as you exhale, imagine unraveling, softening, unwinding, wiggling, pressing, dropping, letting go. Okay, when you're ready, bring your eyes back to the screen. So, how do we know the difference between good and bad stress? Well, good stress typically is creative, it's energizing, it is something we know we have the capacity to get through, even if it isn't creative or energizing. So, not good stress, it's when we feel the capacity for whatever we have to tackle is completely diminished and that we don't feel we have enough resources in order to do it. And that is a really great time to do a couple of key things. Rest, do the acronym HALT, which right is that sort of am I hungry, angry, lonely, or tired? Um, Also checking in with friends, neighbors, family, checking in with your pet, checking in with journaling, checking in with your body in order to give it some measure of release. Because functioning at a high cortisol level for a long period of time, where you're just producing that dopamine, adrenaline, and cortisol unnecessarily because you're really not needing to be creative or perform a task, but you're ruminating or experiencing anxiety, it can actually, right, diminish our capacity. What helps us grow resiliency is first to recognize what it feels like in our body and know that we have capacity to overcome it. Resiliency is also cultivated by recognizing triggers is a big buzzword right now. I'm not a big fan, but it might mean that something pops up that reminds you of something of the past that didn't go well, perhaps. And instead of thinking it as a trigger, consider thinking of it as information. Huh, well, that's interesting. I wonder why they said that, right? If we think about it as information instead of, well, they can't do that because I'm going to get triggered, right? We cannot control the triggers of the world. We can't control our losses. They are going to happen. But what we can do is find that space in order to respond. And the space, by re identifying whatever happened as information, gives us access to so many more tools. So I would be curious for you, if this resonates with you, to just gently write that down. If there's something that's been, quote, triggering you lately, certainly not to diminish whatever that is, but can I get interested in it? Can I cultivate some information from it? It might be telling me that I'm overtired, that I've run into the same problem over and over again, and I need to get help, or I need to ask for help, or I wonder why this is making me angry every single time I feel heated. Well, I don't know. That would be good information for you to begin to explore. Resiliency helps us build actual physical strength. If we have a negative belief that we don't have capacity, then we certainly cannot begin to build that actual physical strength. There is an increased immunity with resiliency. It is a powerful tool that we have inside our body. Rest helps us grow our resiliency. If you can identify a few of your strengths, that's going to help you grow your resiliency. I would love for you to put in the chat box, if you're willing, a couple of your strengths. Share it with others right now. I'm good at communication. I love to help others. I I know how to rest. I am great with numbers. I'm good with my plants. I know how to care for my dog. Whatever it is, put it in the chat box now. I would love to hear what you feel some of your strengths are. If you can, list a few of your intrinsic strengths. Um, a person of integrity. I'm someone who values honesty. I'm someone who values my own worth. So if you're willing, I would love for you to add a couple of those in the chat box so that we can see and celebrate you. So, and lean in on your sources of joy. What does that mean exactly? How can we lean in into our joy? And there has to be something. Some of you think maybe scrolling might bring joy, but I would encourage you just to notice the length of time in which you spend with that. And is there diminishing returns? I think a fun or funny video can be really useful, but I think hours on end can be sort of mind numbing. And also it creates different synapses so that we actually become desensitized to joy and also suffering. So, what are some of your sources of joy? Oh, I love this. Thank you for sharing some of your strengths. Someone wrote, I'm organized. I value honesty. Someone else said, oh, this is going to make me teary eyed. I'm a 2-time cancer survivor. Oh, yeah. And I can't give up on myself. Thank you for sharing that. Oof. Ah, that did it for me. Thank you. So, self-compassion. This is huge. Many of you, I'm curious how many of you struggle with self-compassion. It is a very difficult tool. So, we're going to take another mindfulness exercise here, specific to self-compassion. If you'll take your hand and simply place it onto your heart and make a small circle with that hand. What are you noticing as you're rubbing your hand on your chest? I'm noticing that little lump in my throat when she said she was a 2-time cancer survivor. That's diminishing a little bit. I'm also feeling some softness in the top of my chest. I'm also noticing my breath is high up. I want to breathe a little bit more in my belly. So putting your hand on your heart, hand on your head, hand on your shoulder, your own hand in your hand, it is a form of self-soothing. Sometimes we do things to self-soothe and we don't even recognize them. We're not even really sure that we do them necessarily. Some of you might, be drinking water right now. That can be a form of self-soothing. Others of you might be shaking your leg or tapping something or fidgeting. That is a form of self-soothing, and there's nothing wrong with it. It is your body trying to regulate itself when you're probably not even aware of any discomfort. Self-compassion and self-soothing are very much interlinked. If you can find the gateway to self-compassion through self-soothing, it is a beautiful gateway to enter. Self-compassion says, I matter. It says that I can show a sense of empathy and inquire within without trying to tell myself that I'm not good enough or I need to be fixed or I'm not okay as I am. Self-compassion says, I'm okay. I made a mistake. Self-compassion says, oof, I didn't say that very well. And I'm going to go back and see if I can repair that. And it's okay. I'm going to do better next time. Self-compassion can start with a hand on the body, a hand on the heart, a hand in hand, a self-hug. but the gateway is a sense of self-soothing. So I'm curious. Yeah, I love that. Someone wrote self-soothing. I'm constantly rocking back and forth, side to side, often without noticing at first. There's nothing wrong with that. Um, it's also really cool, though, if you're now aware of it, if you can begin to notice if it works for you. Is it calming you down? Some of you might pace. Some of you might go for brisk walks or exercise intently. Some of you might really tune out with a television show, and then afterwards you kind of feel depleted, right? So notice if the types of things that you ingest, are they truly self-soothing or are they self-numbing? So keeping that in mind and how that plays into grief and resiliency is huge. How we overcome loss is looking at how we self-soothe and how much compassion we can offer ourselves and then therefore offer to others. So resiliency has also grown through finding community. If you don't have community, it's okay. You can start now. I know for some of you, it's hard. It's not easy to ask for help. It's not easy to be there for others. I often hear caregivers say, I can't do this volunteer. I can't do that because I'm not reliable. I have all my energy in this. Well, yeah, that's probably true. But my guess is there's probably 10 minutes out of every month that you have that you could text someone and say, how are you? I've been thinking about you. Or there might be 10 minutes in which you could call a family member and say, this has been really hard. How are you holding up? Because it's not always about doing really big things. It could be tiny little things in which we are doing bids for connection with people who have similar, right? Similar experiences or values or beliefs that we do, in which we can find support in those. I even am looking more and more these days for people that are different from me in order to find community. One of um, my favorite things to do is to walk with my 80-year-old neighbor. And we have found more in common than we have found apart. And we don't necessarily have the same beliefs, but we like to walk slow. And we love to do it later in the morning. And it has given me a newfound sense of community, even within my own neighborhood. I need to walk. I feel better. And I love learning from her. So let's do another example of some mindfulness. This is called who breathing. And this who breathing technique is simply the word WHO. So you're not saying who, but you're almost whispering it as if you were blowing out a straw. And I want to imagine what I'm blowing on is light as a feather. So it's not necessarily like I'm blowing out a birthday candle, but I want to blow it out as long and smooth as I can. Then take a gentle inhale. We're going to do it for a count of 5. So just for fun, hold out your hand for me, and we're going to count down to 0. So if you can start with 5, breathe in and who breath out. And breathe in again. I'm going to go to 4. And who breath out. You can close your eyes if that feels good for you. You can feel your feet on the ground. I'm going to go to 3. Breathe in. Breathe out. I'm going to go to 2. If your breath is longer or shorter than mine, that's okay. And breathe out who. Breathe in. And breathe out who. And last one. Breathe in. And breathe out who. Now breathe normally. In and out. Are your breaths longer or shorter? Smoother or more staccato? Do they feel more spacious or narrow? So just curious. What is the breath like for you now? Some individuals don't like breathing. It makes them feel a little more anxious, which is why I added the counting. I find that using two different parts of my brain, active breathing technique with counting, actually gives me a little more to focus on. So I'm not focused on feelings of anxiousness or other emotions tied in with grief. So we've already talked about the different types of grief. There are myths to grief that we need to grieve only a certain amount of time, that we can only grieve a certain way, that grief needs to be fed. I would be curious, what are some of your myths, which usually kind of land around family beliefs around grief? If you have any of those, I would like you to put them in the chat box. We're going to finish today in a moment with a grief timeline. And I'm going to share that with you. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. So a grief timeline will have several different columns. You're going to start in one column. And in that first column, you're simply going to list a few of the things in which you have lost. Now, today I'm going to ask that you keep it in a category on a scale of 0 to 10. Let's maybe pick a 5 or less. So let's not pick the hardest grief that you need to process right now. You could make a note of it and come back to it later, but just while we're together today, let's keep it just a little bit less. So I'm going to list a few things for me. Um, uh, I recently lost a piece of jewelry that was special to me. And weirdly enough, I've really been mourning it because it was from someone I really cared deeply about and will never see again. I'm also um, grieving a sense of loss with um, my son. He left school and left home early, and I got to visit him this weekend. And so grief kind of poked its head back up, even though he's been gone a while, of just remembering how I feel like, oh, I feel a little bit of loss around those years that I missed out when he left home sooner than expected. Uh, I would say you can grieve anything. It can be a divorce, it could be a death, it could be a pet, it could be an object, it could be moving, it could be a change of jobs, it could be even a new job and a loss of an old job. It could be a loss of time. It could be a loss of um, a physical ability. I often see people in chronic pain who mourn or grieve a sense of perhaps their own body. There's grieving and aging, a sense of losing different capacities. I feel like I'm grieving my eyesight. All I want to do, the only I can do with readers is have them on, or I've got my font up to here. um, there's so many different types of grief. So that's one column. So hopefully you've jotted down. In column number 2, what is the emotion associated with, pick one of them, that grief? So I'm going to choose my son. I was feeling that this weekend. I felt so much love and joy when I was with him, but grief visited because there was again that old loss of, gosh, I just didn't get enough time with him when he was home. And so the emotion for me was a little bit of bittersweetness, which means sort of sadness and nostalgia mixed with resonance, meaning I feel okay. Like we have a healthy relationship today anyway. So there is a little bit of resonance there in bittersweetness. Other things like losing an object. I broke something recently that just can't be returned. It was something my grandmother had painted, and that'll never come back. And so there was just that sense of, oh, just like regret a little bit, like, oh, I wish I hadn't have set it there and it wouldn't have fallen off, or right, like, and there was also yeah, a little bit of missing her. So there was that sort of sense of loneliness, that hunger for my grandmother. All right, so that's your emotion column. And the next column, where do you feel it? So I'm going to take the example of my son. Well, I feel a little bit of tightness in my throat because I feel a little bit of tears maybe forming. Or in terms of my grandmother, I feel a little bit of heaviness on my shoulders. Sometimes when I think about my grandmother, I actually feel lightness because there's more nostalgia and there's more joy and happiness and remembrance. So the first column is the loss, the second column is the emotion that you're experiencing, and the third column is where do you feel it in your body? Now, the fourth column is what do I want to do with that feeling today? So keep in mind, right? If I were to think about that grief when my son left home years ago, whew, there was shock. That was an emotion. There was deep sadness. There was some guilt. There was all kinds of emotions. What did I want to do with it? Well, I felt it all over my body. I wanted to make amends, or I wanted to write a letter, which I did all of those things. I let him know I was supportive, that I loved him anyway, right? I was like, we gotcha, unconditional. In terms of my grandmother, I've seen that grief arc change and come. I remember being the depths of sadness when she passed, when I was just, gosh, it was the year before my son was born because, oh, I wanted him to know her. But it's changed over time. And now, as I think back, I almost feel like she is this sort of being here that puts her hand on my shoulder every once in a while. So grief can change and move. It can be one emotion now, it can be another emotion later in your life. What's important is to check back in with it. In other words, you don't have to assume all better. You get to check in. Well, how do I feel? Where do I feel it? And then what do I want to do with it? And the what do I want to do category, it's limitless. Um, I have decided when, not now, but later in my life, I think I want to take up some kind of artwork and painting in honor of my grandmother. I don't really have time for it now, but it's in the back of my head. And that's one way that I would like to honor her memory. Um, for my son, I continue to reach out and be supportive and companion him rather than try to tell him what to do. That doesn't work, right? So I do those kinds of things. I let him know that I'm here for him. It could involve a text. Other things might be planting in your garden, finding a memorial. Maybe you go somewhere where you lost the person that was important to them, or maybe it's a place that's important to you. Maybe I was talking to someone the other day and they were unable to go to the gravesite of the person they lost, but they called and made sure the gravesite was cleaned up. And that felt good for them. They said, that's good enough. Um, Another person might choose to sing a song, play a favorite song, listen to a symphony, or go to a concert in memorial to the other person. You might have an animal that you just pet. So there's so many different ways in which you can honor your current emotion and that current sensation that you feel. I would love to hear in the chat box, if you're willing, you don't need to share what you're grieving, but maybe how you plan to honor it. It could be calling a friend. It could be taking a drive. It could be spending time in nature. It could be going for a walk. It could be looking at a photo album. It could be playing a song. It could be breaking something, right? Like not all grief is, right? This nostalgic. It could feelings of anger could be rising. Could mean that you go to um, uh, a really strong exercise class and get some energy out, right? Whatever it is that you need to do that helps resolve that feeling in the body. In other words, grief is somatic. We feel it in our bodies if we allow ourselves to. All right. We've covered a lot today, and I know that we're at time. I'm going to take one more mindfulness exercise with you. And it's just simply an exhale. We all breathe in. And in this exhale, I want you to imagine either a waterfall or a pool or an the ground, an endpoint, or something you're nourishing underneath you. Let's do it one more time. Breathe in. And as you exhale, imagine. I always love to imagine how, right, the expiration of my breath feeds and nourishes plants. It's like that giving and receiving. So it is my hope today. Grief is so much. I could probably do a year-long series on grief. Um, but my hope today is that you took at least one nugget away from this experience today for you, and that you are able to utilize that. If anything, it's finding a way to pause so that you can recognize that grief does have an emotion, it does have something happening in the body, and that you can do something, right, to express that grief. And it's okay to do that. So thank you all so much for joining me. I hope that you will come back in 2 weeks. Please go to the link that you signed up for this in about a week, and registration should be up. I'm going to put my email address in there again. It's caregiversretreatinfo@gmail.com. And if you want to shoot me an email and let me know what your experience was like today, I'll share it with AARP so that I can continue to do these wonderful series. And also, if you're interested in getting the recording, then I can send you that, or prior week's recording. I know many of you asked for the boundaries recording. So beautiful. And if you have any other feedback, I would love to hear that. I'm going to go ahead and we'll stop recording.